So we're at Norris Ford and they're getting ready to assemble a Model T car in 30 minutes and then they're going to drive it down the road. So this should be very interesting. They said they were going to start at 12 o'clock. It's just about that time now, so just stay tuned.
Usually that used to be in the old days, you have color coding. Now it's different buttons.
They just spread all the parts out a couple of minutes ago. They kind of had them together so it wasn't blocking up the walkway, but they just spread everything out, and they should only be a moment or two away from starting the assembly.
Put it back together. They just took it apart. They drove it in this morning. They took it apart. Put it back together.
That's well, I saw.
They got to do that soon. Supposed to. It said 10 minutes, not 20 minutes. They said how long it's going to take. Probably won't take one more. They probably do it all the time. Yeah. You ever see one of those people taking cars? Like an old Williams. Well, I just said one. Yeah. I'd pretty much like this. Like that. Take it apart, move it out the other end of the place. Instead of taking a new car apart, put it back together. Yeah.
What's different about it?
Okay, they're getting ready to get started, so just hang on, guys.
Oh yeah, because you figure.
Testing. Is that allowed as to go, Mike?
Yeah.
Put it up as much volume as you can give me. Volume. Testing. Volume. Testing. That's it? Okay.
Caitlin, I landed that.
That's it.
Holding that.
Ladies and gentlemen, we missed hearing the national anthem, but I hope you can hear this behind me. This is the best we can do on this highway. What you're looking at is a crew from the nation's capital Model T Ford Club, a collection of members who live in Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Delaware, and even West Virginia, who belong to a single club. I'm going to introduce the members and tell you what we're going to be doing today. We have people mostly from Maryland, but some from Virginia. Our crew leader today is Mike Silbert. He is followed by his father, who doesn't pay any attention to him, called Don Silbert. He's followed by our treasurer, Tom Turco, who couldn't wait for the check that they gave us. By Jeffrey Whitsitt, who is a school teacher in Montgomery County Systems. By Ford Chenoweth, who was our stenographer, secretary of the club, who fingers never leave the keyboard. Juanita Hayes, who tries to keep Mike in line. Dick Sullivan, who's our membership director, and everyone behind me is expected to pay $50 today to become a member of the club. And I'm Erwin Mack from Tacoma Park, Maryland. The purpose of this is twofold, and the Norris Ford decided that they wanted this particular program. We do this in two versions. One is a speed contest to say when I say go, they go as fast as they can to actually drive the car away. Now you can imagine that this is not a roadworthy car, it's what you call a trick car, but in fact all the parts are genuine Model T. However, today they asked to have a so-called historic version done, which means that for a few moments I'll be chatting about the beginnings of the Ford Motor Company, what brought them into play, and ultimately how we ended up doing Model T business. So that's what they want. So the crew, instead of racing, will wait for me to give them directions. Okay, it's time to put the engine and transmission in, that kind of a thing. We don't worship Henry Ford, we respect his intelligence and engineering. And he wasn't the first to have the assembly line that people many think of. A man by the name of Ransom E. Olds was doing work on cars and built thousands of cars called the Curve Dash Olds. Okay? If somebody wants a pamphlet of our club, there's a signboard down there about the bottom of the tent with these in it. You're welcome to that. Thank you, Dick. Ransom E. Olds came up with the idea of building single-cylinder, wooden-bodied steering column wheel units, not like a sailboat, as opposed to a wheel. And what he did was to find groups of people who would put everything in a single car together, engine parts, wheel parts, all that. But it was very time-consuming and very laborious. So an idea hit him based on the Chicago stockyards, which was sending carcasses down the line in a sort of an assembly line process to be broken up into parts and pieces. And he said, let's put a rope on a rolling chassis and pull it by several groups of people, each doing the same job. And sure enough, that began to make sense. So from 1901 to 1904, Ransom E. Olds was putting out about 4,000 cars a day, while Henry was still working on coming up with his first quadricycle. Now, in spite of his brilliance, Henry Ford sometimes did dumb things. And one of the things that he did was to make his very first car, which had no brakes and no reverse, and it was a steering column as opposed to a wheel, a tiller. He built it too big to get out of the garage door. Actually did. It's historically correct. He had to take part of the jamb of the door off to get the car out. Now how's that for intelligence? But he got it out and it ran down the street at nighttime with a bell chiming like a Bermuda bell. So Henry began to produce cars, and of course you know that one or two of his original plans to build cars failed. He went bankrupt, had to find new founders, and finally he got the Ford Motor Company established. So what I'm going to do is talk about parts and pieces as the men start and the ladies start putting things together, otherwise they get tired and want to sit down. So if you'll come to your stations, crew, the first thing they're going to do is prepare to put an engine in place, and then they will stop once that's in place. So they're going to lift up the rear end and way up in the air to be able
guys,
to put
come on, I'm live streaming now. Stop that, please.
385-pound block of engine and transmission into the frame. Go ahead at your own discretion. This is preset on pins, of course, they're located. It's not a light thing to do. They have to watch out for their shins. And if you'll notice what I said, it's a single pan that serves to lubricate engine and transmission. Now the Model T engine served for 18 years, from 1909 to 1927. And the last Model T came off the assembly line after 15,007,000 were produced in May of 1927. The single pan means that when you put oil in the engine, I'll get my facts straight yet. When you put oil in the engine, you're actually lubricating the parts in the transmission. So Don, while you're there, would you point to that black box on top of the hood? That's a box that has 4 coils in it to serve the electrical circuitry, not yet, Dick. Hold off, Dick, relax for a moment. To serve as an electrical charge to each of the pistons, 1 coil for each. It was originally under the hood of the car, that is under the dash of the car, and then finally the uses they made were wasn't enough room, so they put it on the engine. The major difference between this engine and the earlier engines is that that coil box is now out front because the gas tank got changed. Now, Ford, would you go to the pedals, please? Ford, the pedals. There are 3 pedals to a Model T. For those of you who think a Model T is easy to drive, it ain't. But it's easy to learn to drive. The pedal closest to me, which Ford is going to touch, is right now in a so-called neutral position. If he pushes it part way down, right there, that's a clutch. If he pushes it all the way down, which he's trying to do very hard, he didn't have much breakfast this morning, that has to be held down by your left foot on for low gear. It's not a gear. I use that term deliberately to then say it's a band on a drum. So if you're going up a long, long hill, your left foot better be in good shape, because anytime you let up on the left foot, it starts to slip. Doesn't hurt anything, you're just not going anywhere. When they get to the top of the hill, you got a little ahead of me on the hand crank. Put it back where it was. The hand crank now, since he's got his hand on it, is in neutral. If he pulls it all the way back, it's a brake to the rear wheels for parking purposes, not to the wheels, not to the transmission. If he pushes it all the way forward, that's in high speed, so you really only have 2 speeds. Low speed, which is worked out at 8 miles an hour, and after that high gear takes over. If you put it into high gear, then you can cruise comfortably at 35 miles an hour. With the pedal in the middle of the 3, Ford, go back there you go, push it forward now. If he's doing that with his right or left foot, he's going backwards. That's reverse. The pedal to the middle of the car is a brake pedal, not to the wheels, but to a band in the transmission. So that's how you have to use it. Afterwards, when the steering column comes on, we'll show you what you have to do in addition to that. Okay, the rear hooks in the rear are getting a little tired, so now we're going to put in the wishbone. The wishbone is the only car ever invented that has a wishbone like this, because it serves to be incredibly flexible. Henry designed a car for the masses. He originally came out with one of as expensive as several $1,000s called the Model K, which is a 6-cylinder, but people couldn't afford it. So he said, I want to build a car that everybody can afford. In 1909, when the first Model T came off the assembly line, it was not inexpensive. It would cost about $965. Without a windshield, you had to pay $30 more if you wanted a windshield. By 1917 or 18, he was putting the same basic chassis out for $370. Now, why is that important? That shows you what production can do to cost if you maintain a single model. Because remember, this, all that you see, was basically the same for 18 consecutive years. Now, something about the times in which the Model T came out. At 1909, men were being paid $2.50 a day for 10 hours of work. Women weren't considered useful in the factory at all. They were kept home barefoot and pregnant. Today, we obviously are glad things changed. By 1914, however, production had increased and Henry saw an opportunity to really do something about sales. So he increased the wages to $5 a day for 8 hours, which you can see is the forerunner of the 3 shifts a day, 3 times 8, 24 hours. So men were flocked by the thousands to Detroit to get a job at such high rates. Plus, the reduced price of the Model T to $335 and $45 gave Henry a market that he hadn't had before. So thousands and thousands of employees bought cars financed by Henry. The reason for this triangle front end is flexibility. In 1909, when the first Model T hit the ground, there were only 400 miles of paved roads in the entire United States. So everything was dirt. They're going to put the rear end now in the differential in, and you will see that the differential has a U-joint at the very front. The front is a silly, easy thing to do, but it's the most complex because things have to line up just right. Now, the first cars that came out, if you look at this beautiful 1913 over to my left on the shade over here, it has a lot of brass on it. The last brass came off the line in 1915 with just parts and pieces left over in 1916. And in 1917, the first all-black, which this is one of, came off the assembly line. No more brass, no more silver, because production. Now, you've heard a silly thing that you can have any color as long as it's, can't hear you, any color as long as it's black. Not true, is that black? But that actually isn't a Model T color. Don Silver just liked it, and Mary Alice made him put that color on. The facts are that the very first Model T did not have black. It was red, blue, gray, and green. And black, however, became the normal color after 1914. 1914 was a stellar year because of salaries. It also became black because Henry had to shut down the assembly line every time he wanted to change color, up to 3 hours of no work just to clean off the vats and change color. So he said, this is costing unnecessarily amounts of money. Wait. So they standardized the color in 1914 to black only clear through the end of 1925. The end of 1925, they started to bring in muted colors because the demand for Model Ts was slowly fading since it hadn't changed in all these years. The differential is now going up so they can put the rear wheels on. We kid about the fact that this chassis never met at the factory. Every single piece of this car was found in members' garages, shops, warehouses, so none of it met at the factory. But you can see how interchangeable assembly processes were made. One of the tires here is actually a World War II tire, because you can see that things haven't changed. As far as parts, very easy to buy anything you see in front of you from someone, a number of dealers who make and sell parts. The only thing we can't find ready-made anymore is an engine block. One of the humorous things is that while Ford made all these Model Ts, about 15 years ago, they decided to build replicas for the Henry Ford Museum, and they couldn't find the plans. So they had to go to the same parts people that we go to buy parts from them to make a car they originally produced. The lug nuts on this car have more miles on them than the tires. Because all we're going to do when we get done here is to drive this car to the trailer that it came on. They're going to drop this down. Notice they're putting the muffler in. The next thing they're going to do is to put the cab on. The cab itself is a bit of a cumbersome one, and this Model T replicates a 1926 unit. So it's going to have the cab put on it, and you'll see something unusual about it that the other models didn't have. The earlier version of this car came about because a story is told that when Model Ts came to a steep hill, there was not enough power in low gear. Watch your shins, watch your shins. Always running board brackets. Watch your shins, Jeffrey, watch your shins. Ford, watch your shins. Don, everybody else. It's just an awkward piece, but that went on in the assembly line. Now it's down. So the Ford didn't have enough power in low gear to get it up a steep hill. So you had to back it up because reverse had more power. It's a 20 horsepower engine. All these 18 years, the same engine. The truth of the matter is simple. When the early cars came out, you sat on the gas tank. It was under the seat. So you had gravity flow about 4 inches above the carburetor, which meant that the 10 gallons would work on flat ground. But if you ran low on fuel, you ran out of gas going up a hill. So if that happened to you, and it has happened to me in one of my Model Ts, you knew it was coming because the car started to jerk, so you stopped and backed and turned the car around, and you backed up the hill because now the remaining fuel was above the carburetor. It's as simple as that. So Henry finally solved it, and Jeffrey raised that lid on the dash. This is now where the gas tank is. They'll put some fuel in a few moments. So now there's no more chance of gravity ever being a problem because it's always going to be on top of the carburetor. Body styles. This is what started out in the factory as a roadster, which means a 2-passenger car. It had on the back of it a turtleneck. But in 1925, the pickup bed that they're bringing came into play. Edsel and his father, as you know, had difficulties in communicating. And Edsel wanted to bring out a pickup much earlier. Henry said they don't need it, let them make their own. So if you see a Model T before 1926, it'll have a wooden pickup bed. This is now an original Henry Ford Model T metal bed. So this car could be changed over by a farmer. Only 4 bolts held the original trunk on. Then you could put this pickup bed on. So some people worked the car during the week and drove to church on the weekend in their roadster. They also made 4-seat touring cars. They also made 2-door sedans. They made 4-door sedans. And in the early versions, they made town cars so the chauffeurs could drive up front while the people in the back were sheltered. They also became taxi cabs. See, now they're putting the steering gear in. Tommy? Ford, you can't hear me so well. Ford, would you go to the steering wheel, please? Steering wheel. The steering wheel has 2 controls below it. On the one he's touching now, on your left, that's the spark control, which they need to, which the computer now does in your engine to provide proper sparking to the plugs. On the right-hand side is the gas control, what we call the accelerator now. There are no foot pedals. And in the instance of this car, which we will have to crank to get it started, that was required of every Model T from 1909 through 1990. For 10 years, there was no starter on the car. You couldn't even order one. So they made accessory starters. However, Henry finally became convinced that it was necessary to put a starter on. So this car couldn't be used like we're doing it with a starter, so we'll always crank it. However, in 1919, a generator was installed, which charged the battery, which made it possible to step on a foot pedal underneath the driver's feet and push down on it, and it will start the car. So this will have to be cranked, but that's the way every Model T came off the factory. He's working on attaching the necessary controls. You can see that in a race, these folks have to be precise, otherwise they can't get stuff on. In a few moments, they're going to put the radiator on. It's a standard 10-quart radiator. Put the water in, attach it, and then ultimately we'll put the rest of the parts on. How many Model Ts were made? Some 15,007,000. When Edsel wanted to build a more improved car, Henry didn't want to because he said, we're doing things for the masses that they couldn't afford otherwise. So finally, after they saw the sales drop in favor of Dodge, Chevrolet, Plymouth, and other companies, they agreed that it was time to build a Model A. So in May of 1927, the last Model T came off the assembly line, and 6 months later, the first Model A of the vintage 3-speed transmission came out. Henry's quadricycle was an A, so that was the second A. 18 letters of the alphabet were used to designate cars. So what we think of today as a Model A was actually the second time a Model A was made. This car has spoke wheels. All through the entire 18 years of Model T, if you look at this beautiful blue car, it has wooden wheels and wooden spokes. Well, we couldn't do what we're doing with wooden spokes because the bearings would have to be removed in order to put this back together again. So the spokes now have lug nuts on them which allow us to take them off easily. And in a speed contest, that's critical, where the others couldn't possibly do it. So these spokes were not available until 26 and 27. But if you wanted preferred wood spokes, you could still order them clear up to the end of the production. So now they're slowly putting things together. The fenders are going to go on, and then we'll see what happens. In terms of production, in Manassas, Virginia, there was actually an assembly plant. Because Henry didn't start out making parts, he had people make parts for him. The Dodge brothers, for example, worked for Henry for years, but not directly for him. They made parts which he purchased from them. And if you buy Model T parts today, you actually might find that there is a D, the letters DB are imprinted on that part. That's because they were made for the Ford Motor Company by the Dodge brothers. Well, about 1950, the Dodge brothers and Henry got into an argument. So they said, Dick, I think the bottom isn't getting in, is it? The very bottom, Dick. The very bottom of that fender. The very bottom of the fender, Dick. You have to lift it up again. So they started making their own cars, and in 1915, the first Dodge touring car came out. From then on, they became competitors. So pretty much you have an idea now what's happened with the Model T. Henry did not do a good job of providing cover for the driver, Ford. He didn't provide much cover for the driver. So we have improvised on protection for the driver by providing better cover than Henry came up with. By the way, though this is a fiberglass window, the original clamp had glass in it. However, it wasn't safety glass. So any of us now who drive Model Ts will always have to get our glass replaced because you would get hurt in case of an accident. And no windshield wiper was available. My wife and I enjoy owning a 1909 as well as a 1924. And the 1924 has no windshield wiper, so if it rains, you're going to get some water in the cab. That's life. And so you end up bringing towels and wet cloths. So give Dick a chance here before you never get the top up. Provide cover for Dick so he wouldn't get his bald head dry. Put it up all the way, put it up all the way. Wait a minute, Mike. Video with Mike. Wait a minute, Mike. Wait a minute, I'll get the top up. You can see what happens in an assembly line. Sometimes there's a struggle to put parts together. Actually, they're only protecting Mike, they may need your help, Mike. Okay, we finally got a top up for the driver. And of course, that didn't originate with Henry Ford. Well, we're about to see if it starts, and if it does, the folks over here, when this thing lurches forward at 90 miles an hour, are going to get wiped out. The rubber burning is going to be incredible if it starts. Mike? There you go. His signal says, let's do it, Mike. Ready. Almost had a fake start. And it's running. And he's going to drive it down there and then back up again. He's going to drive it down there and come right back up again so you'll see the gears all work. And there it goes. So you see it's possible. We enjoyed sharing this with you. I hope you enjoyed it, learned something. And we'll see you another time.
I'm not keeping it. Quit letting it.
Okay, so their number is 703-281-3444. So that's 703-281-3444. There's a nice crowd here. I think he's coming back now. How cool. It's a lot of fun to see this.